A Texas woman convicted in the gruesome death of her neighbor is scheduled to be executed by lethal injection today. Kimberly McCarthy was convicted of stabbing her neighbor Dorothy Booth to death in 1997.
On the evening of June 26, 2013, at precisely 6:37 p.m. Central Daylight Time, the state of Texas did something it had never done before. It killed its 500th person. 500. Not a statistic. Not an abstraction. 500 human beings. 500 last breaths. 500 final heartbeats monitored, recorded, and declared stopped. And on that particular summer evening, the 500th person to die strapped to a table in that pale green room was a 52-year-old black woman named Kimberly McCarthy. Whatever you believe about the death penalty, about justice, about mercy, about guilt and innocence, what happened in Texas on that June evening was not simple. It was not clean. It was not, as the state would prefer you to believe, just another day of justice being served. It was a mirror held up to America. And most people looked away. Today, we don't look away. To understand Kimberly McCarthy, you have to first understand Texas. And to understand Texas, you have to understand just how alone it stands when it comes to the death penalty. The United States has carried out more than 1,500 executions since the Supreme Court reinstated capital punishment in 1976. Texas alone? Responsible for nearly 40% of them. Let that sink in. One state. Out of 50. 40%. Virginia sits a distant second, nearly 400 executions behind. Texas doesn't just lead, it dominates. It executes at a pace that, in some years, averages one person every 3 weeks. Since 1982, when Texas resumed executions after a brief national pause, the Huntsville Unit, a prison in a small East Texas town that smells like pine trees and feels like the end of the world, has been the stage for this relentless ritual. Families arrive. Lawyers scramble. Governors deliberate or don't. And at the end of it all, a needle is inserted into a vein, a chemical is pushed, and a person stops breathing. 500 times. By the summer of 2013, Texas had become so practiced at this, so mechanically efficient, that anti-death penalty advocates called it, with a mix of fury and despair, a killing machine. In 2000 alone, more than 36 people were executed in Texas. By 2013, the pace had slowed somewhat. McCarthy was only the 8th that year, but the machinery had never stopped. And into that machinery, on a hot July night in 1997, stepped a woman from Lancaster, Texas, a suburb south of Dallas, who would become, by accident of history, the face of a number no one quite knew how to feel about. The face of the 500th. Kimberly McCarthy was born on May 11, 1961, in Greenville, Texas. She was not born into a life destined for greatness, but she was not born into poverty and chaos either. She was born into the ordinary, complicated South, a black woman growing up in Texas in the 1960s and 70s, navigating a world that was slowly, painfully changing around her. She found a vocation. She became an occupational therapist at a nursing home. She worked with the elderly. People who needed patience, gentleness, skill. By all accounts, she was good at it. She had a son. She fell in love. She was briefly married to Aaron Michaels, a man who would later found the new Black Panther Party, and the two had a son together. It is a strange and jarring detail, isn't it? That a woman who would end up on death row was once just a mother. A caregiver. A wife. A person who helped elderly people dress themselves in the morning. But life, as it so often does, cracked open. And something dark got in. Crack cocaine arrived in American cities like a plague in the 1980s. And it was deliberate, in some ways, or at least, neglected deliberately. It tore through black communities with particular ferocity, and the government that could have responded with treatment and compassion chose instead to respond with handcuffs and prison cells. During her adult life, McCarthy developed an addiction to crack cocaine. By 1990, she had a conviction for forgery, as well as convictions for prostitution and theft. This was not a woman who needed a prison cell. This was a woman who needed a rehabilitation clinic, a counselor, a safe house, a second chance. She got none of those things. She got the streets instead. Dorothy Booth was 71 years old in the summer of 1997. She had lived a full life, decades spent teaching psychology at El Centro College in Dallas, shaping young minds, grading papers, arguing ideas. She had retired. She had a home she loved. She had a diamond wedding ring she had worn for decades. She had a neighbor named Kimberly McCarthy. On the morning of July 21, 1997, McCarthy called Booth and told her she was coming over to borrow some sugar. A cup of sugar. The most innocent sentence in the English language. The kind of thing neighbors have said to each other 1,000 times. Come over. Have a cup of coffee. Borrow what you need. Dorothy said yes. And Kimberly came over. What happened inside that house is not disputed by the physical evidence, even if McCarthy herself disputed it until her last breath. McCarthy stabbed Dorothy Booth 5 times with a butcher knife, beat her with a candelabrum, and cut off her finger, while she was still alive, to steal her diamond wedding ring. She then stole Booth's purse and her Mercedes-Benz. She drove to Dallas, pawned Dorothy's wedding ring for $200, and went to buy crack cocaine. $200. For a life. For a ring worn decades in love and partnership. For the finger it had rested on. $200 and a trip to a crack house. Dorothy Booth died alone on her kitchen floor. She was 71 years old, and she had opened her door to a neighbor who asked for sugar. The next day, McCarthy was charged with murder. Evidence showed she had used Booth's credit cards at a liquor store and was found in possession of Booth's driver's license. Traces of Booth's blood were found in McCarthy's home. DNA from the murder weapon, recovered from McCarthy's residence, matched Dorothy Booth. The evidence was devastating. But the story, as you will see, was not over. Not by a long show. Here is where the story gets darker. Because Dorothy Booth, it turned out, may not have been Kimberly McCarthy's only victim. During McCarthy's 1998 sentencing hearing, prosecutors presented DNA evidence linking her to the murders of 2 other elderly women in Dallas County in December 1988, 81-year-old Maggie Harding and 85-year-old Jetty Lucas. Both women were elderly. Both women were beaten. Harding with a meat tenderizer. Lucas with both ends of a claw hammer and then stabbed. Both murders, according to prosecutors, were carried out for one reason: to get money to buy cocaine. McCarthy was never charged with those murders. She was indicted, but never tried. Why? Part of it was prosecutorial strategy. They already had her on death row for Booth. Why complicate things? Part of it was evidentiary. DNA evidence in 1988 was not what it would later become. Part of it remains, simply, unexplained. And so 3 elderly women, Dorothy, Maggie, Jetty, are connected by blood evidence to one woman. And only one case was ever fully prosecuted. McCarthy denied everything. She said she was framed. She said the evidence was planted, the witnesses were wrong, the prosecutors were lying. She said she was innocent. She said it until the needle went in. In 1998, a Dallas County jury convicted Kimberly McCarthy of capital murder. But here's something you need to know about Dallas County and the death penalty. Something that should make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. Dallas County has a notorious, long-standing history of excluding African Americans from criminal juries. In McCarthy's 2002 capital retrial, the state used peremptory strikes to exclude 3 of the only 4 non-white potential jurors. Let me repeat that. Prosecutors looked at a pool of potential jurors, identified the black members, and struck them from the jury, legally, under a practice called peremptory challenge. McCarthy is black. Her victim was white. All but one of her 12 jurors were white. Is that justice? is a jury of your peers, which is what the Constitution promises, a jury from which people who look like you have been deliberately removed. McCarthy's lawyers would spend years fighting this. They filed appeals arguing racial discrimination in jury selection. They cited the Supreme Court's ruling in Batson v. Kentucky, which prohibits race-based jury exclusions. McCarthy successfully appealed her first conviction in 2001. She was retried and resentenced to death on November 1, 2002. She had beaten death row once. She was sent back to it. And the jury in her second trial? Still predominantly white. Still selected through a process her lawyers argued was tainted by racial prejudice. The appeals court didn't want to hear it. They said her claims should have been raised previously. The clock kept ticking. Most of us don't think about what it's like to spend years, decades, waiting to be executed. From her second sentencing in November 2002 to her execution in June 2013, Kimberly McCarthy lived on death row for more than 10 years. 10 years of knowing. 10 years of appeals, of hope, of setbacks, of prayers, of watching other prisoners walk that last walk. She was one of only 10 women on Texas's death row, but the only one with an execution date. She had a son out there, growing up without his mother. Growing up knowing the state was going to kill her. She had a faith, a deep, seemingly unshakable Christian faith, that she leaned on like a wall. She wrote letters. She prayed. She told people God was watching. And she kept saying, "I didn't do it. I was framed." To the end. Her final federal appeal was denied in July 2012. The Supreme Court refused to hear her case in January 2013. An execution date was set. January 29, 2013. January 29, 2013. The day had come. Kimberly McCarthy had been prepared. She had been moved to the death house, a separate unit adjacent to the execution chamber at Huntsville. She had been given her last meal. She had been watched and monitored and processed and prayed over. And then, hours before the scheduled execution, everything stopped. A Dallas judge granted her a stay of execution. Her lawyers had filed a last-minute appeal arguing racial bias in jury selection. The judge wanted time to review it. Can you imagine? To be that close, to have looked death in the face, to have made your peace, to have said your goodbyes, and then to be told, not today. Not today. But the day is coming. We just don't know when. She went back to her cell. She waited. 5 more months passed. By the time June 26, 2013 arrived, something had shifted in the air around this case. Because people had realized this wasn't just another execution. This was the 500th. Anti-death penalty advocates pointed to the milestone as a moment of national reckoning, especially as 6 states had abandoned capital punishment in the previous 6 years, and public support for the death penalty was at a decades-long low. Outside the Huntsville unit, protesters gathered. Among them, Jean Wilkins Dember, 83 years old, holding a sign in the Texas heat, protesting the 500th execution. An 83-year-old woman standing in the heat to say, "This is wrong." Inside the prison, Kimberly McCarthy was making her final preparations. Her lawyers were still fighting. Maury Levin, her attorney, was on the phone with courts, filing motions, burning through every remaining legal option. Levin argued that the jury selection had been blighted by racial discrimination, that prosecutors had used peremptory strikes to systematically exclude non-white jurors. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals said no. The governor's office made no move. The Supreme Court, once again, declined to intervene. And at 6 p.m., on a Wednesday evening in June, Kimberly McCarthy was brought into the execution CH. She was strapped to a table, and 4 line was inserted into her arm. She looked at the ceiling. She breathed. She may have prayed. And then she spoke. Here is what the number 500 means. 500 families gathered in a waiting room and were told their person would not be coming home. 500 families of victims who had waited, sometimes for decades, for what the state called justice, and who watched the needle go in and waited to feel something that would make the pain go away. And sometimes didn't. 500 people, most of them poor. Most of them without adequate legal representation. A staggering proportion of them black, or Latino, or mentally ill, or all three. Texas had, at that point, accounted for nearly 40% of all executions in the United States since the Supreme Court allowed capital punishment to resume in 1977. 40%. From one state. In one country. And for what? Studies have shown again and again that the death penalty does not deter violent crime. States without capital punishment do not have higher murder rates. The data is not ambiguous. It doesn't deter. It doesn't heal. It doesn't restore. What it does is end a life in a controlled, bureaucratic, legally sanitized manner, and let us call it justice. Let me tell you something that the state of Texas would prefer you didn't dwell on. Kimberly McCarthy, an African-American woman, was sentenced to death in Dallas County for killing a white woman by a jury that was all white but for one person. Research on capital punishment in America has found, consistently, that the race of the victim, not the defendant, is the most powerful predictor of whether someone receives the death penalty. Kill a white person, and you are significantly more likely to be sentenced to death than if you kill a black person. The legal system doesn't say that. The courts don't say that. Nobody writes that into the statutes. But the data says it. The data says it loudly. Kimberly McCarthy's lawyers said it. They argued it before every court they could find. They named specific jurors, specific strikes, specific patterns. And the courts kept saying, you should have raised this earlier. Earlier? When? When she was on trial. When she was a black woman in a Dallas County courtroom, with an all-white jury, and prosecutors who had struck 3 of 4 non-white jurors. The catch-22 of capital defense in America is that the time to fight is almost never when the system says it is. And by the time you've accumulated enough evidence to fight effectively, the courts say you're too late. I want to pause here, because in the noise of legal arguments, racial statistics, and historical milestones, it is easy to forget someone. Dorothy Booth. Born May 14, 1926. Died July 21, 1997. A retired psychology professor who had spent decades teaching at El Centro College in Dallas. She spent her career helping students understand the human mind. She retired to a quiet neighborhood in Lancaster. She had a Mercedes. She had a diamond ring given to her in love. She opened her door to a neighbor. She died on her kitchen floor. Dorothy Booth's family lived with what happened in that house. They sat through 2 trials. They gave victim impact statements. They watched appeals stretch on for 15 years. When the January 2013 stay of execution was granted, just hours before McCarthy was to be put to death, Booth's relatives were devastated. They had prepared. They had braced themselves. And then they were told, more waiting. Whatever you believe about the death penalty, whether you think it is justice or revenge, closure or theater, you cannot dismiss what Dorothy Booth's family carried. The weight of a violent loss. The exhaustion of a decade and a half of legal proceedings. The desperate need for something, anything, to feel like an ending. They deserved peace. They deserved healing. Whether an execution gave them that is a question each of them. Not everyone believed Kimberly McCarthy was guilty. Or at least, not everyone believed she had received a fair trial. Her attorney, Maury Levin, fought for her until the very last possible moment. She filed motions, made phone calls, stood outside courtrooms in the Texas heat. She believed the jury selection was corrupt. She believed her client had been failed by a system designed to fail people like her. Levin told NBC News on the morning of the execution that for this case to be the emblem of Texas's 500th execution was something all Texans should be ashamed of. Those words, that all Texans should be ashamed, did not make the front pages. They did not interrupt the evening news. They were spoken into the wind. And yet they mattered. Because shame is where change sometimes begins. Outside the prison, advocacy groups pointed to the 500th milestone as a moment to confront the racial bias baked into Texas's death penalty system, a history of discrimination in Dallas County that wasn't a secret, but a documented, studied, argued over reality. Kimberly McCarthy had become, by the brutal arithmetic of history, a symbol. She hadn't asked to be. She was just the 500th person strapped to that table. The woman who happened to be next in line when the odometer rolled over. But history doesn't ask. I keep coming back to her last words. This is not a loss. This is a win. You know where I'm going. I'm going home to be with Jesus. Keep the faith. I've read them 100 times since I started working on this script. And each time, something different strikes me. This is not a loss. Was she right? She was a woman who had spent 15 years on death row. She had lost, by most measures, almost everything. Her freedom. Her son's childhood. Her ability to hold the people she loved. Her days and nights in a cell, measured out in legal filings and appeals and prayer. And at the end of it, she looked at the people who had come to watch her die, and she said, "This is not a loss." There is something in that, something defiant, and maybe something true, that I find impossible to reduce to a sentence. Was she innocent? I don't know. The evidence against her was considerable. The DNA. The credit cards. The car. The pawned ring. But was she tried fairly? Did she receive the full, impartial due process that the Constitution promises every American? I don't think the answer to that is as simple as the courts pretended it was. And somewhere in that gap, between what the evidence says and what the system did, lies the tragedy of Kimberly McCarthy. In the decades since Kimberly McCarthy's execution, the national conversation about capital punishment has continued to shift. More states have abolished it. Public support has continued to decline, particularly among younger Americans. Exonerations have continued to accumulate, people freed from death row after years of wrongful imprisonment, their convictions overturned by DNA evidence or recanted testimony or prosecutorial misconduct discovered too late. Texas has continued to execute. But even in Texas, the pace has slowed. The number of death sentences handed down per year has dropped dramatically. Juries have become more reluctant. Prosecutors have become, in some counties, more cautious. The machine is still running. But it is running slower. And the people who stand outside prisons with candles, who file motions until midnight, who tell reporters that all Texans should be ashamed, they are still there. They will be there until the machine stops. Here is what I want you to take from this story. Not a verdict. Not a verdict on Kimberly McCarthy, that ship has sailed on the legal record, however imperfect. Not a verdict on the death penalty, though I hope this has given you something to sit with. What I want you to take is the weight of it. The weight of 500. 500 is not a number that should be said quickly. It should be said the way you say the names at a memorial, slowly. With gravity. With the understanding that each number was a person, and each person had a story, and many of those stories involved a system that was cracked and uneven and deeply, structurally biased. Dorothy Booth deserved justice. Kimberly McCarthy deserved a fair trial. Both things can be true. The elderly women of Dallas County who lived in fear deserved protection. The black men and women of Dallas County who were stripped from jury pools to deliver predetermined verdicts to white juries deserved better. All of these things can be true at once. And that is the terrible complexity of the 500th execution. Not a story with heroes and villains. Not a story with a satisfying ending. But a story with a number, and a name, and a woman who looked at the ceiling of an execution chamber and decided she was going home to be with Jesus. This is not a loss. This is a win. You know where I'm going. I'm going home to be with Jesus. Keep the faith. Whether you believe her or not. Whether you grieve for Dorothy Booth or for Kimberly McCarthy or for both of them at once. Whether you think justice was served or justice was mocked. You cannot listen to those words and feel nothing. And in this world, in this era, in this conversation about who we are and what we owe each other. Feeling something. If this video made you think, if it unsettled you in a way that feels important, I hope you'll share it with someone. Not because I want the views, but because these conversations only happen when people decide they're willing to have them. Leave a comment below. Tell me what you felt. Tell me where you disagree. Tell me what I missed. And if you want to go deeper, I've linked everything in the description. The court filings, the advocacy organizations, the academic research on racial bias in capital sentencing. The whole picture. Thank you for watching. And thank you for not looking away.